Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. I am GM Dave, and I'm here once again as your man behind the screen. Today we're going to be continuing our ongoing series, So You Want to Be a GM, moving forward from our video on the basics with a more in-depth look at our first lesson, being prepared. So, without any further ado, let's set the stage. You've offered to GM for your gaming group. It's your first time and you're a bit nervous, but after talking with your players, you've managed to work out what sort of adventure they want to play. You've plotted, you've planned, you've put together something that you think will give them the kind of adventure they're looking for. But the day of the game is fast approaching, and now you're wondering, what do I need to do to make sure I'm prepared to run this game? Let's take a look. The first thing you're going to need to do in order to stay prepared is work out exactly what needs to be brought to the game. This includes some of the obvious things that I mentioned in the previous video, your books, your dice, notes, paper, pencils, and so on, but there's a few more things to consider than just these. Firstly, you need to work out where you're all going to be playing the game. Are you playing locally at a table, or online with friends near and far? If you're going to be playing locally, where will you be playing? Can you run the game from your home, or will you have to go to one of your players' homes? Maybe you'll be playing in the local comic or hobby shop, or maybe someplace else entirely. The point is, you need to have the location worked out in advance. Next, if you are playing face-to-face at the same table, when are you playing? What dates and days of the week work for all of you? What time of day? How long can you play? Will these time constraints be further limited by the location you chose? Who is going to bring snacks and drinks? Will everyone be bringing their own thing, or are you all going to pitch in? Is a different person assigned to it each session? If the session will be a long one, how will you handle meals and breaks? All of these things should be worked on in advance of your game as well. If you're playing online, however, you are going to run into a different string of problems. You will still need to work out when you'll be playing and for how long, but depending on your players, you may run into additional obstacles such as time zone differences. How will you account for these? What site or sites do you plan on using to host the game? Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, or something else entirely? How will you be communicating? Will you use Skype, Discord, Google Hangouts? What other alternatives do you have available if someone can't use a particular program for one reason or another? Certainly a very different set of problems from the previous, but they run along the same vein of problems that need to be tackled in order to preserve your game's quality of life. Okay, so you have the pre-game details worked out and game day is here. You and your friends are ready to start playing and you begin spinning your narrative. You enter the small town of Westrun, a community besieged by fear of the dead rising from their graves. The people of the town believe the nearby cathedral is to blame. To them it is a cursed and befouled place, upon which they place all of their ills. The town itself is sparse, mostly being made up of small cottage houses with picketed fences holding livestock or small vegetable fields, but you do see a few structures of note. The local inn and tavern, a smithy, the general store, a tailor, and the alderman's home. Where would you like to go first? Once you pass the torch to your players, listen closely, because this is the time that you have to start taking notes. But what sort of notes should you be taking, and what sorts should you already have handy? There's a few things to look for in terms of your in-game note-taking that will help make running your sessions a little easier. First among these should be the basic information you come up with for your NPCs. Now, ideally, you will already have most of this with you, but as a new GM, it can simply be easier to come up with the names and roles of your NPCs ahead of time, and then worry about figuring out the personality later on during the game itself. So as you experiment and figure out the ways in which your NPCs behave, jot down some basic notes on their personality. You should also keep notes on your players' reactions to your different NPCs. This will not only help you to keep your NPCs consistent, but also to understand the sorts of NPCs your players like and dislike. Also, how do the PCs react with each other? Which characters get along well and which ones don't? What sort of inside jokes do the PCs share? These sorts of things will clue you into the dynamic of the party, which can be great for helping you establish new plot hooks, adventures, and adversaries that really make the players feel like their characters belong in your world. Take note of what sort of playstyles the players have. Which abilities do they tend to favor? What sort of encounters do they try to avoid? What rewards are they most enticed by, and what items, spells, and abilities, or even other characters, are considered the most valuable to them? Noting these will permit you to tailor your rewards to the way your players approach the game, again allowing them to feel more involved in your world and engaged in the game. Will also allow you to plot ways in which you can build tense and exciting moments for your players to overcome. By understanding their style of play, you can find ways to have their enemies work around that, forcing them to think on their toes and get more invested when combat begins and the dice start rolling. Next, what sort of notes should you already have with you? The obvious answer here is your campaign notes, your maps, your monster stats, traps, rewards, NPC information, and so on. However, you should also set yourself up with quick and easy access to important information such as easy to forget rules that are pertinent to your game. You can bookmark them in the appropriate book, write them in your notebook, or even print them out and tape them someplace. The point is that they should be easy and quick to find when you need them. You should also be armed with information on your players' characters, their names, the race and class choices they made, their skills and abilities, so on and so forth. As the GM, you should be aware of most, if not all, of these things so that you can better tailor your game in such a way that it's fun and challenging for your players. I personally like to have an extra copy of their character sheets on hand, whether it's a physical or digital copy, and keep up to date with them so that I know exactly what sort of characters they're building. Lastly, and this ties directly into the next section, keep a list of random NPC names on hand that you can use when your players inevitably find that random person that you just plopped into a scene and decide to take an unhealthy level of interest in them. If you're playing an online game, pair this with a collection of random character pictures that you can just drop into your game. Doing this, and pairing it with fresh notes on the NPCs as you make them up, will allow your players to feel immersed in the world, since you'll manage to avoid the fumble of having to admit that you've never planned anything for that character to begin with. With that said, we move on to the final segment of the video. Prepare for your players. As mentioned in the first video in the series, your players can and will surprise you at just about every turn. Just when you think you've got them pegged, just when you think you know exactly what sort of crazy thing they're going to try to do to get out of whatever sinister predicament you place them in, they think of something you never would have thought of on your own. So then, how can you plan for such unpredictability? Firstly, by paying attention to the way your players like to play the game and taking notes on that. There will always be moments where your players will absolutely catch you off guard, but getting to know their playstyle is one of the best ways that you can ensure that you're ready for when the less insane instances of player surprise do come across your lap. Second, practice improvising. Many of the surprises your players bring come from them simply taking things in a direction that you didn't plan for. Maybe you needed them to speak to the town mayor about his town's issue with the tainted grain, but they instead decided to talk to the giggly pink-haired gnome who plays ukulele. Well, have her feed the hints about the problem instead. Perhaps they hear about the rumors of Westruun's cathedral, but would rather check out the old keep they saw on the way in. Unwittingly, they turn away from the adventure you created and tried to present to move to something that you have nothing planned for. Don't fret about this. Just move the dungeon to the new location. This is your world, and nobody needs to know that you didn't plan for that. If your players are more interested in the keep that you didn't plan than the cathedral that you did, let them go there and discover that the tall, weathered walls they thought belonged to an old keep actually were the collapsed walls of the cathedral all along. Perhaps, as they're cutting through the wilds to reach the keep, they get ambushed and knocked unconscious. Then, when they awake, they're someplace underground, in a set of catacombs that they don't recognize. Catacombs that just so happen to be the very dungeon at the cathedral that you planned for them. Or maybe they make it to the old keep after all. They find it crumbled and destroyed, but amidst the rubble is a trap door leading to an underground tunnel. An underground tunnel that just so happens to lead them straight to the adventure you already planned. Remaining calm and flexible is key when it comes to being prepared for the surprises your players will fling at you. Remember that you don't have to stick to every detail exactly as you wrote it. It's perfectly okay and sometimes even preferable to let your players take the reins. They don't have to know that the horses are all going to lead them to the same place anyway. It's better to allow them to find what you planned in a way that you didn't fully plan for than to force them to do things exactly the way you want them to. After all, they're not playing for you. You are GMing for them. Well, friends, that's all for today's topic, but we'll be back next week to continue with the third lesson in our series, Talking to Your Players. Once again, I'm GM Dave, your man behind the screen, and until we meet again, roll high, role play well, and game on.